Joining me now is Philip Ingram, a former senior intelligence officer who we're going to talk to about the breakdown of that temporary humanitarian pause in Gaza and Israel. So thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
I mentioned earlier, just going back to this quote by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he says, quote, "There is no way we are going to stop the fighting until the end." And the end for him and for Israel, as long as he is their leader, is the absolute destruction of Hamas, a terrorist organisation on the doorstep. Now, the first question I have for you, Philip, is that achievable?
In one word answer, no. Because Hamas is much more than just a group of people with a terrorist cause, or a terrorist organisation has got a cause behind it.
And it's an ideology.
And it's an ideology. And therefore, the underpinning ideology will come up, whether it's called Hamas or still Hamas or continuity
or
Hamas.
ISIS or Islamic State.
It'll come up as something else. And this is where the humanitarian pause that we've just had was never going to be anything permanent, because there's been nothing permanent as a negotiating stance put on the table. And therefore, you can't have a ceasefire unless you've got something that both sides can use as a foundation for negotiation.
But of course, for our viewers and listeners at home, there was a permanent ceasefire.
Up until the 6th of October.
Are the building blocks that put that permanent ceasefire in place, which was when Israel, which had previously occupied the Gaza Strip, withdrew from the Gaza Strip, they handed power over, I think, initially to the Palestinian Authority, and then Hamas won an election.
That's right.
Are the building blocks and the international will, over a decade ago, 16 years ago, but put that permanent ceasefire in place, are they still there? Or is Israel, quote unquote, Benjamin Netanyahu, their prime minister, fighting till the end?
Well, I think building blocks are still there. And I think that's why we've seen so much international diplomatic effort going around all of the other Arab countries. I think there is movement from outside to try and influence those building blocks and dismantle it from elsewhere. In particular, that's Iran. Iran doesn't want those building blocks there. Surprise, surprise, Israel was just about to normalise relations with Saudi Arabia whenever the 7th of October attack happened. And the headlines, we have to be really careful in the press. The headlines this morning are turning around in a lot of the major outlets and saying, Israel has reinitiated its attacks against Hamas in Gaza. It was Gaza that fired the first missiles at 6 o'clock this morning against Israel. And a Hamas-related terror organisation carried that terrorist attack in Jerusalem yesterday as we're running up to this.
The shooting of innocent civilians.
Three dead.
But that sort of points to almost how Hamas, although it initiated as a terrorist organisation this conflict, has lost control of it, because that shooting of innocent civilians in Jerusalem was a splinter group. It wasn't Hamas itself. It was someone who's either inspired by the ideology of Hamas or some way very vaguely connected with them. And this really is the challenge of what Israel is setting out to do. Let's not forget, there are appalling individuals who attack people today who claim to have been inspired, remain inspired by Adolf Hitler and the sort of the appalling ideology of Nazi Germany. And that is 70 years plus after he is dead, he was defeated. So if you can never remove the ideology that may inspire people to get involved in these terrorism attacks like we saw yesterday in Israel, you can't bomb that ideology out of existence. If we are all hopeful and we would like to see peace, we've spoken about the building blocks, what do Israel, Hamas and the international community need to do to try and bring this conflict not to a ceasefire, but to peace, which is very different?
Well, I'm going to take Hamas out of it, because unless Hamas changes its constitution, which turns around and says it wants to see the destruction of the state of Israel and the murder of every Jew, unless they change that and therefore they don't become Hamas, it's the Palestinian people and the representatives of the Palestinian people. So that's the Palestinian Authority, who are internationally recognised as that. Hamas needs to be removed. Now, you can redefine what the complete destruction, what removal is, if they can be rendered to a point where they can't carry out military/terror organisations against Israel in any form the way they've done beforehand. I think Benjamin Netanyahu would find that acceptable.
OK, so they have to, let's try and put the building blocks in place. So they have to be removed from a government position. They were elected 16 years ago. They have no real current democratic mandate, nor does the Palestinian Authority, however. So they have to be removed from the governance. So we hear these death toll coming out of Gaza, and we always say this is the health ministry that is controlled by Hamas. So make of that what you will when it comes to those death figures, and there's disputes about how accurate they are. They are the government of Gaza. So you think what Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to achieve through military action is to remove them as the government of Gaza? Would that be success? Shorthand version of success.
It's not just remove them as the government of Gaza. Remember, they're not a legitimate government. It's not.
Well,
it's not.
They were elected, albeit a long time ago.
Yeah, and they have terrorised the Palestinian people as much as Israel's been responsible for issues in West Bank and elsewhere. I think it's the removal of their ability to operate as a coherent organisation and then allow something else to come in and take over as the authority inside Gaza. And I think the Palestinian Authority have been approached to look at that. And remember, before Hamas appeared, we had Fatah in there, we had the Palestinian Authority, with Yasser Arafat, who was negotiating a lot with Israel. But I think there has to be a longer-term solution put on the table here for negotiation. And this comes down to what everyone is saying, a two-state solution. Unless we get into something like that, this is just going to continue year after year, or there might be a couple of years gap, there might be another 10-year gap, but it's just going to come back again.